Ida for telling my siblings I don't want to split the bill equally since they have kids and I don't. Navigating family dynamics can be one of life's most intricate puzzles. For many, those relationships are rooted in love and shared experiences, but they can also become tangled in tension, especially when it comes to money. I'm the youngest in my family, with two older sisters who are both in their 30s. Meanwhile, I'm still in my 20s, and while we share a close bond, there has always been an underlying tension regarding financial matters. This tension has come to a head recently, prompting me to question whether I am in the wrong. My sisters both have families, each with two kids. They have built lives filled with responsibilities, but I am single and child-free. This distinction, which I've often viewed as an advantage, has now turned into a point of contention when it comes to splitting bills. Our family outings, be it dinners, vacations, or celebrations, have always involved dividing the costs evenly. However, the reality is that while I'm paying for myself, my sisters expect me to contribute to their entire family's meals, which feels fundamentally unfair to me. The most recent incident that triggered this debate was a Mother's Day lunch my sister suggested for our mom. It seemed like a fantastic idea to gather together, celebrate our mom, and enjoy a nice meal. However, as soon as they proposed it, they began discussing how we would split the bill 3 ways equally. This wasn't the first time we had approached this situation, but this time, I felt an overwhelming need to voice my concerns. In previous family gatherings, I had always kept my thoughts to myself, trying to maintain harmony, but the underlying frustration had been simmering for too long. I knew this year was different, so I mustered the courage to speak up. I told them it didn't seem fair to split the bill equally when their kids would also be eating. And let me clarify. These kids aren't toddlers who will nibble at a piece of bread and call it a day. One of them is almost 18 and capable of ordering full meals, drinks, and desserts like the rest of us. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt the temperature in the room drop. My sisters were quick to become defensive. They accused me of being confrontational and of making a big deal out of nothing. They insisted it was just a family meal, and we shouldn't nitpick over who ate what. But to me, it was never about nitpicking, it was about fairness. I wasn't trying to be cheap, I simply didn't think it was right for me to cover a portion of their kids' meals when I was only responsible for mine and our mom's. The tension escalated when my mom found out about the disagreement. She always manages to find out these things, and her reaction was predictable. She sided with my sisters. She said I was making a mountain out of a molehill and urged me to let it go for the sake of keeping the peace. But this wasn't the first time I had suppressed my feelings. I was tired of feeling taken advantage of simply because I didn't have kids. To provide more context, this wasn't an isolated incident. A couple of years ago, we went on a family trip where the plan was to split the costs 3 ways. My mom, one sister, and I. I assumed this meant we would share the costs of accommodations and perhaps some group activities. However, once we arrived, it became clear my sister was including her husband and kids in the arrangement. I ended up paying 1/3 of the costs for a trip that included her entire family. My mom noticed this discrepancy, but begged me to stay silent to avoid conflict. So I did. I swallowed my frustration, kept my mouth shut, and paid my share. But it left a lingering resentment that resurfaced during this latest Mother's Day situation. After I brought up my concerns, things were tense between my sisters and me. I felt the weight of unresolved feelings, and my mom maintained her usual stance of urging me to keep the peace. Although we were still cordial, the air was thick with unspoken frustration. A few weeks later, one of my sisters suggested we all get together again for a dinner at a nice restaurant in town. The invite naturally included our mom, and my sisters planned to bring their families. Instinctively, I braced myself for another round of financial awkwardness. The last thing I wanted was to repeat the experience of feeling like I was covering for everyone else while they enjoyed a nice meal. As the dinner approached, I thought about how to address the bill situation without causing a stir. Perhaps they would recognize the unfairness of our previous outing and choose a more equitable way to split the bill this time. I tried to remain optimistic, clinging to the hope that this time would be different. The day of the dinner arrived, and we found ourselves in a cozy, dimly lit restaurant with a warm atmosphere. I could sense the excitement in the air, especially from my sister's kids, who were eager to share what they wanted to order. As we were seated at a large table near the back, I glanced around the table, hoping to gauge the mood. The kids were already animated, discussing their dinner and dessert choices, while my sisters chatted with their husbands. My mom sat quietly at the head of the table, as she usually did. However, amidst the laughter and chatter, I noticed no mention of how we would split the bill. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, but decided to remain patient. Maybe they were waiting until later to discuss it. As the evening unfolded, we ordered appetizers, main courses, and drinks. I made sure to select something modest, keeping my budget in mind. Meanwhile, my sisters and their families weren't holding back. They ordered steaks, cocktails, and various sides, and I watched as the kids made their own lavish selections. By the time we reached dessert, I braced myself for what I feared was coming. When the waiter finally placed the check on the table, it felt like a climactic moment in an unspoken drama. My heart raced as I awaited someone to make the first move. My older sister picked up the check, glanced at it, then passed it to my other sister, who did the same. Finally, they exchanged looks and turned to me. "Guess we'll just split it 3 ways again," my older sister said nonchalantly, as if we hadn't just experienced a similar disagreement weeks earlier. At that moment, I felt a surge of frustration. I knew that saying something might ignite another argument, but I couldn't allow this to happen again. I had made my point clear before, and I wasn't about to back down now. So I asked to see the bill. My sisters exchanged a quick glance, but handed it over. I quickly scanned the itemized list, noting what I had ordered, as well as what my mom had eaten. I pulled out my phone and did some quick calculations to ensure I accounted for everything accurately. "I'm going to pay for just my meal and mom's," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "You guys can split the rest however you want." Silence enveloped the table. My sisters stared at me, clearly taken aback by my response. I could see their husbands looking at each other, unsure whether to intervene. Meanwhile, the kids remained oblivious, still chattering about dessert. My mom, bless her heart, sighed and looked down at her hands, clearly not wanting to get involved. "You're serious?" my other sister finally asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "You're just going to pay for yourself and mom?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady. "That's what I think is fair." An awkward pause followed, and I could tell they didn't know how to react. This wasn't the response they had anticipated, and they were now faced with the reality of splitting the costs for their own meals and their kid meals. After what felt like an eternity, they reluctantly nodded. "Fine," my older sister said, a hint of annoyance in her tone. "If that's what you want." I didn't say anything else. I counted out the cash for my portion, left it on the table, and excused myself to go to the bathroom. When I returned, the tension was still thick, but I noticed the check had been settled. We left the restaurant shortly afterward, exchanging barely a word as we departed. The car ride home was quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. Had I done the right thing? Or had I just widened the chasm between us? The next day, I received a call from one of my sisters. I had known this conversation was coming, but that didn't ease my apprehension. When I answered, she wasted no time getting to the point. "You really embarrassed us last night," she said, her tone a mix of anger and frustration. "I don't know why you had to make such a big deal out of it. It's not like we're asking you to pay for our kids, just to split the bill evenly like we always do." I took a deep breath, striving to remain calm. "It's not about making a big deal. It's about fairness. I'm paying for myself and Mom. I don't think it's right for me to cover part of your kids' meals when I'm not the one who decided to have kids. Family helps each other out," she shot back. "It's not about who ordered what or who has kids, it's about being together and sharing the costs." "I get that," I replied, trying to maintain a composed demeanor. "But it doesn't feel like sharing when I'm paying for more than what I ordered. I'm not saying I don't want to help out, I just want to make it fair. Honestly, it feels like you're being selfish," she said, her voice rising. "You're the only one without kids, and now you want to act like you're better than us?" I felt my heart sink. The last thing I wanted was to create a divide based on our life choices. "I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. I just want to be treated fairly." The conversation ended with neither of us feeling satisfied. We both hung up feeling frustrated, and it left me contemplating my relationships with my sisters. Days passed, and while we still communicated, the atmosphere was strained. I couldn't help but think back to all the times I had held back my feelings, and I began to question whether I should have stayed quiet this time around. After all, family gatherings had been enjoyable for the most part, but was it worth losing that comfort for the sake of fairness? A week later, my other sister reached out to me. She wanted to discuss things over coffee. While I was apprehensive, I agreed. During our meeting, she took a more conciliatory tone. She acknowledged that I had valid points, and while she felt frustrated about how I addressed the situation, she admitted it wasn't right to expect me to cover their kids' meals. "I guess I didn't realize how much it bothered you," she said. "We've always done things this way, and I never thought about how it felt from your perspective." As we talked, I began to see the possibility of finding common ground. We discussed how we could approach family gatherings and finances moving forward, ensuring that everyone felt comfortable and heard. It was refreshing to finally have an open dialogue about our differing views. In the end, we agreed that during family outings, we would be more transparent about our expectations regarding splitting costs, especially concerning meals involving children. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like a step in the right direction. Our conversations helped me realize that while family dynamics are complex, having open communication can pave the way for understanding. As I reflect on this experience, I still ponder the bigger picture. While my initial reaction was rooted in frustration, it ultimately led to an important dialogue about fairness and boundaries. Life is undoubtedly messy, especially when it comes to family relationships, but navigating those complexities with honesty and compassion can help strengthen our bonds. So, aita for standing my ground regarding the bill at family outings? Perhaps. But what matters most is that it opened the door to a more constructive and understanding relationship with my sisters moving forward. Am I the jerk for wanting to split the bill fairly? Finally, she sighed and said, "Look, I get where you're coming from, but you have to understand that it just makes things awkward when you do stuff like that. We're used to splitting things evenly, and when you break it down like that, it just feels like you're being petty." I didn't know how to respond to that. To me, it wasn't about being petty, it was about standing up for what I felt was fair. But clearly, they saw it differently. "I'm not trying to make things awkward," I said after a moment. "I just want to make sure we're all being fair to each other." She didn't say much after that. We wrapped up the conversation, but I could tell she was still upset. I was left with this nagging feeling that maybe I was the one who had messed up, even though I believed I had done the right thing. After that conversation with my sister, I was left stewing for days. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. The expectation that I should just keep quiet and go along with what they wanted, even if it wasn't fair, weighed heavily on my mind. I kept replaying her words in my head. We're family. Family helps each other out. But wasn't fairness supposed to be part of that equation too? Wasn't it supposed to be a two-way street? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being cornered, that my sisters were using the whole family angle as a way to get what they wanted without considering my perspective. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. If they wanted to play the "we're family, so we split everything equally" card, then maybe it was time for me to show them what that really meant. The idea hit me out of nowhere, but once it did, I couldn't let it go. I was going to turn the tables on them and see how they liked it when the shoe was on the other foot. If they were so insistent on splitting the bill 3 ways, then I was going to bring in a few reinforcements of my own. A couple of weeks later, my older sister texted me asking if we were all free for another family dinner. This time, it was for my mom's birthday, and she suggested going to this upscale Italian restaurant that had just opened up downtown, the kind of place where you have to make a reservation weeks in advance, and the wine list is longer than the food menu. Perfect, I thought. This was exactly the kind of setting I needed. I agreed to the dinner, but this time I had a plan. I reached out to a few of my closest friends, people I knew wouldn't say no to a free meal, especially at a place like this. I explained the situation to them, and they were all too happy to play along. I told them to order whatever they wanted, no holding back. This was going to be my little experiment in fairness. The night of the dinner arrived, and I showed up at the restaurant with my entourage in tow. I could see the surprise on my sisters' faces when they realized I hadn't come alone. There were 5 of us all together, myself and my 4 friends, compared to their usual party of 6, including my mom. As always, my mom tried to keep things pleasant, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes, wondering what was going on. "Hey, everyone." I greeted them with a big smile, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. "I hope you don't mind, but I invited a few friends to join us tonight. I figured it would be nice to have a bigger group for Mom's birthday. The more, the merrier, right?" My sisters exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to respond. Their husbands looked equally puzzled, and the kids seemed more interested in the menu than in the new faces at the table. I could tell my sisters were trying to stay polite, but I knew this wasn't what they had in mind. Sure," my older sister finally said, forcing a smile. "The more, the merrier." We all took our seats, and my friends mingled in seamlessly, chatting with everyone as if they'd known them for years. The waiter came over, handed out the menus, and took our drink orders. My friends didn't hold back. They started ordering the most expensive cocktails on the menu. I could see my sisters' eyes widen slightly as they realized what was happening. I kept the conversation light, trying to keep things as normal as possible, but all the while, I could see my sisters growing more and more uncomfortable as my friends kept ordering appetizers, main courses, sides, and desserts. They didn't skip a beat, and neither did I. I ordered whatever I wanted, just like my friends, enjoying the looks on my sisters' faces as the orders piled up. By the time we got to dessert, I could tell my sisters were getting anxious. They knew the bill was going to be massive, and I could see them whispering to each other, probably trying to figure out what to do. But I played it cool, pretending like I hadn't noticed a thing. Finally, the waiter brought the check, placing it in the center of the table. My older sister hesitated, but eventually reached for it, just like she always did. I could see her scan the bill, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the total. She passed it to my other sister, who had a similar reaction. They both looked at me, and I could see the unspoken question in their eyes. What now? So, I guess we'll just split it 3 ways again, right? I said, mimicking my sister's words from the last dinner. I kept my tone casual, almost nonchalant. But inside, I was savoring the moment. The silence that followed was deafening. My sisters looked at each other, then at me, and I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were cornered. If they agreed to split the bill 3 ways, they'd be paying for a huge chunk of the meal that my friends who they hadn't invited had ordered. But if they didn't, they'd have to admit that maybe, just maybe, the way they'd been splitting things before wasn't as fair as they thought. My older sister was the first to speak. Well, I mean, it's a pretty big bill, and your friends ordered a lot. Maybe we should, I don't know, split it differently this time? Oh, come on, I replied, keeping my voice light. We've always split things 3 ways. We're family, right? Family helps each other out. I watched as the realization hit them. This was exactly what I had been saying all along, but now they were on the receiving end of it. They were the ones being asked to pay more than their fair share, and they didn't like it one bit. My other sister cleared her throat, trying to sound reasonable. Maybe we should just split it based on what everyone ordered. That might be more fair considering the circumstances. I leaned back in my chair, acting as if I was thinking it over. I guess we could do that. But I mean, that's not how we usually do things. Are you sure? I could see the frustration in their eyes, but they were stuck. They knew they couldn't argue without looking like hypocrites, so they reluctantly agreed. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it, my older sister said, her tone resigned. We'll split it based on what everyone ordered. All right, I said, pretending to be accommodating, if that's what you want. We spent the next few minutes going over the bill, dividing it up based on what each person had ordered. My friends, who had been silently enjoying the show, pitched in their share without complaint. When it was all said and done, my portion ended up being significantly smaller than it would have been if we'd split it evenly, and my sisters ended up paying more than they had anticipated. But it was all fair, exactly what they had asked for. We wrapped up the evening, and as we left the restaurant, I could tell my sisters were still processing what had happened. They tried to keep things friendly, but I knew they were annoyed. My mom, who had stayed quiet throughout the whole thing, gave me a look that said she knew exactly what I had done, but she didn't say anything. She just gave me a small smile, as if to say, I see you. The ride home was quiet, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had made my point, and I knew my sisters wouldn't forget it anytime soon. I wasn't sure if it would change anything in the long run, but at least now they knew how it felt to be on the other side. The next day, I got another call from my older sister. I figured she would want to talk about what had happened, and I wasn't wrong. So, about last night, she started, her tone hesitant. Was that really necessary? Bringing all those friends along just to make a point? I knew this was coming. Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I just wanted you to see what it feels like. You've been asking me to split bills equally, even when it's not fair, and I'm tired of it. I wanted to show you that it's not right to expect someone to pay more than their share just because we're family. She was silent for a moment, and I could tell she was trying to process what I'd said. I get that, but it felt like you were just trying to make us look bad in front of everyone. It's not that we don't appreciate you, we just have a different way of doing things. I sighed. I understand, but maybe it's time to rethink how we do things. If we're going to be family, let's be fair to each other. That's all I'm asking. I'll think about it, she said finally, but it doesn't mean I agree with your methods. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's fair. Just think about it, okay? I don't want this to come between us. I just want things to be equal. After that conversation, things settled down a bit. I didn't notice any immediate changes, but I felt like I had at least made a point. I hoped it would lead to a more equitable understanding between us in the future. Whether I was the jerk or not, I had stood my ground, and that was something I could be proud of. In the end, it wasn't about the money, it was about respect. I wanted my sisters to see that fairness mattered, especially when it came to family. And if that meant shaking things up a little, then so be it. I knew it would take time, but I believed that eventually we would find a way to work through it together. After all, family is supposed to be about love and support, but it's also about fairness and respect.